In 2013, I was working as a pizza delivery driver, a simple job, but one that, on that night, would become one of the scariest experiences of my life. It was an ordinary night, and I was already used to the delivery routine, but something told me that this night would be different. I received an order that made me frown when I saw the address. It was a distant location, in a rural area, and the route promised to be the longest I had ever taken. The route would take me out of the city, along dirt roads that, at night, became even more difficult to navigate. The order was for 4 large pizzas, and I imagined it would be for a party, which got me excited about the possibility of receiving a good tip. I grabbed the pizzas and got into the car, setting the GPS to guide me to the location. As I moved away from the more urban areas, the darkness seemed to envelop everything around me. The few streetlights began to disappear, and the houses became more and more sparse. The atmosphere became eerie, and the silence, broken only by the sound of the car's engine, began to weigh heavily. After about 20 minutes of driving on winding, dimly lit roads, I finally arrived at the indicated address. In front of me was an old, isolated house, surrounded by tall trees and shadows that seemed to come to life under the faint moonlight. The house, although it had a few lights on, looked abandoned, with an appearance that would make anyone think twice before approaching. There were no other cars parked nearby, which seemed strange to me, considering the size of the order. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds, trying to gather the courage to get out. I decided to call my boss and confirm the address, hoping there was some mistake. He, in a bad mood, confirmed that I was at the right place and encouraged me to knock on the door to see if anyone was there. My boss didn't like getting pizzas back, and I knew he wouldn't be pleased if I returned with 4 untouched pizzas. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, feeling the cold night wind cut through my skin. I walked towards the house, trying to shake off the nervousness. When I reached the door, I knocked hard since there was no doorbell. I waited, but there was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time, and began to feel a growing sense of unease. That's when I heard a sound coming from inside the house, a strange noise that I couldn't immediately identify. I shouted that I was the pizza delivery guy, but there was no response. The silence that followed was even more disturbing. I thought about going back to the car and leaving, but before I could make that decision, something in the window caught my attention. There was a figure, standing, looking out. The only thing I could clearly see were the eyes, wide open in a way that seemed impossible. The sight caused me paralyzing fear, and all I could do was drop the pizzas on the ground and run back to the car. I got in the car and tried to start it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Each time I turned the key, my panic increased, and I felt my heart race. On the 3rd attempt, the engine finally started, and I sped towards the dirt road. However, the car began to shake in a strange way, and I quickly realized that something was very wrong. The car stopped, and I knew I would have to get out to check what was happening. When I got out, I saw that all 4 tires had been slashed, completely flat. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and my first thought was that someone had done this while I was at the door of the house. Without thinking twice, I got back in the car, locked the doors, and grabbed my phone. I called the police, trying to stay calm as I explained the situation. The officer who answered was understanding and instructed me to stay hidden in the car, with the doors locked, until the patrol cars arrived. While I waited, the silence around me seemed to amplify my fear. I was in the middle of a forest, completely isolated, and I knew that the person who slashed my tires was still nearby. I looked around, checking the car windows to make sure I was alone, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopped. There was the same figure I had seen in the window, now standing behind my car, the eyes even wider and a smile beginning to form on their face. Panic overtook me, and all I could do was open the door and run into the forest, not caring about the noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath and hid behind a fallen log. I tried to control my breathing and stayed there, hearing only the sound of my heart pounding. Time passed slowly until I finally heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I gathered all the strength I had left and ran back to the road, where I saw the patrol car lights approaching. The police arrived quickly and began to investigate. I explained everything that had happened, still breathless and in a state of shock. While one of the patrol cars searched the house, the officers asked me several questions, trying to understand what had happened. They returned without finding anyone, just some sharp objects that were probably used to slash my tires. The police believed I had been targeted by a troublesome couple, who likely tried to intimidate me or something worse. They were never found, which left me with a feeling of insecurity and unease that never went away. The next day, I quit my job and started working at a supermarket. The image of that figure behind my car, with wide eyes and a sinister smile, is something I will never be able to forget. This event completely changed my perception of safety and made me realize how vulnerable we can be in situations that, at first glance, seem harmless. For years, my nightly walks with my dog were a peaceful, almost therapeutic routine that I deeply enjoyed. Living in a middle-class neighborhood known for being safe and welcoming, I never imagined that an ordinary evening could turn into something so unsettling. But that night, which began like any other, quickly became a nightmare that still haunts me. It was winter, and the nights were already dark before the clock struck 7:30. I had just arrived home, and after a quick dinner, I got my dog ready for our evening walk. We left the house, and the cold air and snow-covered sidewalks gave the surroundings a silent, serene feel. The streets were deserted, as was typical during that time of year, and the few streetlights cast long shadows on the ground. I followed my usual route, a path that passed by a park and looped back to my house. It was a route I knew well, safe and predictable. While my dog sniffed a tree, I glanced down the road ahead, and that's when I noticed something that made me uneasy. About 100 meters away, I saw a car parked oddly, pulled up against the curb. All the headlights were off, but the car's interior light was on, and I could see someone moving in the front seat. It struck me as strange, but not immediately alarming. Maybe someone had stopped to look for something or just something, I thought. I kept watching discreetly, not wanting to appear suspicious. The car wasn't near any houses, which made me wonder what the person was doing there. I didn't feel scared, just a little concerned. I tugged on my dog's leash and kept walking, determined not to pay too much attention to the car. As I got closer, I saw that the occupant of the car was a man. He seemed to be frantically searching for something in the glove compartment, moving in a nervous manner. I tried to avoid letting him notice that I was watching, but suddenly, he turned and made eye contact with me. The shock was immediate, but I quickly looked away, trying to act natural. To my surprise, the man waved amicably and rolled down the car window, calling out to me. He asked if I could help him, explaining that his car was having some trouble. At first, he seemed like an ordinary person, around my age, maybe someone who genuinely needed assistance. However, as he began talking about mechanical issues, using terms I didn't understand, I realized I wouldn't be able to help him. I politely responded that I didn't know how to fix the problem and started to walk away. As I did, I heard the sound of the car window closing and, shortly after, the engine starting. Moments later, the car began to move, as if nothing had happened. This immediately made me uneasy. The man had said the car wasn't working, so why was he able to start it so easily? This contradiction alarmed me, and my mind began racing with thoughts about what might be going on. The sense of safety I had always felt in my neighborhood started to crumble, and my heart began to race. I kept walking, but now with quicker steps, feeling an urgency to get home. The final part of my route was through a more isolated area, where the path passed behind some houses and connected to a side street that led straight to my house. This stretch was darker, with few lights, and I always tried to cross it quickly. When I reached this part, my intuition told me to speed up, so I did. To my horror, as soon as I entered this street, I saw the same car from before, parked strategically at the end of the path. It seemed like the driver was trying not to be seen, but there was no doubt it was the same vehicle. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, and my body went into high alert. Without thinking, I yanked my dog's leash hard and started running in the opposite direction, back the way I had come. My only concern was to get out of there as fast as possible. I passed by the park again and, this time, chose an alternate route home, a bit longer, but more well-lit and closer to several houses. As I ran, I glanced back a few times, but it seemed the man wasn't following me. Even so, I didn't feel safe until I finally reached my front door. I quickly went inside and locked all the doors. Still breathless and with my heart racing, I grabbed the phone and called the police. I reported the incident with the man and the car, describing everything that had happened. However, I realized that in my nervousness, I hadn't paid attention to the car's license plate, which made it harder for the police to take action. Even so, they reassured me and said they would patrol the area. A few nights later, while walking my dog on a different route, I saw the same car parked again, this time with all the lights off. Panic surged through me immediately, and without hesitation, I called the police. They arrived quickly and began investigating the vehicle. When they checked the license plate, they discovered the car was stolen. This discovery confirmed my worst fears. The man I had encountered was clearly dangerous, and something terrible could have happened that night. The police started an investigation, but the man was never found. Since then, my sense of security in the neighborhood has vanished, and the simple act of walking my dog at night has become a task filled with anxiety and fear. This experience made me realize that danger can lurk where we least expect it, even in a place we've always considered safe. It's terrifying to think about what could have happened if I hadn't followed my intuition and fled when I saw that car again. To this day, when I walk my dog, I'm always vigilant, never letting my guard down. When I was a child, at just 13 years old, my life was quite simple. I lived with my family in a 2-story house, a modest building that housed the 5 members of our family. As the youngest, I had the smallest room, a small square space on the first floor, while my brothers occupied the larger rooms upstairs. It was a tough time, with my mother struggling to take care of us on her own, so there weren't many luxuries in our home. My room was peculiar. It was right next to the living room, and despite being small, it had a feature that always caught my attention. There were large ventilation grates in the floor and ceiling, one in each corner of the room. These vents were old, part of the house's ventilation system, and seemed to bring the winter cold directly into the room. The wooden floor creaked with every step, and the bed, which took up half the space, barely left room for me to move. One night, I was lying in bed, doing my homework. Since I didn't have a desk in my room, I used the bed as my study surface. The environment was quiet, with the only light coming from the lamp beside the bed. My brothers were upstairs, probably watching TV or playing video games. My mother was busy in the kitchen, preparing something for the next day. Everything was peaceful until a sound broke the silence. A laugh. Not just any laugh, but a child's laugh, echoing through the room in a way that made me stop what I was doing. It was a loud and clear sound, impossible to ignore. I froze, trying to figure out where that sound was coming from. I left my room and went to the living room, then to the kitchen, looking for any sign that someone was nearby, but everything was empty. I went upstairs to check if my brothers were up to something, but they were distracted with whatever they were doing, not paying attention to what I was saying. I returned to my room with a strange feeling. The laugh had been so real that I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I tried to focus on my homework again, but it was hard to ignore what had happened. Some time passed, and I began to think that maybe it had been a mistake, something I heard from outside the house or a bizarre coincidence. But then, the laugh came back. This time, it was longer, echoing in a way that seemed to fill the entire room. My heart raced, and fear began to take hold of me. The laugh wasn't coming from outside, as I had thought before. It was coming from inside my room. I felt a chill as I realized the sound seemed to be coming from one of the floor vents. My instinct told me not to investigate, but childish curiosity got the better of me. I knelt beside the vent and brought my ear close to the metal grate. Silence returned, and for a moment, I thought it was all over. But then, a sense of dread hit me when, instead of hearing something, I saw something. 2 eyes, glowing and fixed, stared at me from the other side of the grate. The scream that escaped my throat was the loudest I had ever let out in my life. I ran out of the room, calling for my mother desperately. She came running, and I tried to explain what I had seen, but all I could do was point to the vent, my heart still pounding uncontrollably. My mother, concerned, tried to calm me down and went to check the vent. There was nothing there. No sound, no movement, just darkness. She told me that maybe I was imagining things, that I was tired from studying, but I knew that wasn't it. Those eyes were real, and the laugh I had heard before wasn't a figment of my imagination. That night, I refused to sleep in my room. I asked to sleep in my mother's room, and seeing the state I was in, she allowed it. During the night, I stayed awake, imagining what could be hidden in the ventilation. Fear wouldn't let me rest, and every little noise in the house made me jump in fright. Days went by, and my mother began insisting that I go back to sleep in my own room. She said there was nothing there, that I needed to be brave and face my fears. But the memory of those eyes haunted me, and it was with great reluctance that I returned to the room. In the days that followed, nothing else happened. The laugh didn't return, and I didn't see anything in the vents again. I started to think that maybe I had really imagined everything, or that some animal had gotten into the ventilation system and caused the confusion. But something inside me knew that wasn't it. There was something more in that house, something I couldn't understand or explain. I spent the next 4 years sleeping in that same room, but always with one eye open, alert to any sound or movement. I never had another experience like that, but the feeling that something was watching me never completely left. When we finally moved out of that house, I felt an immense relief, as if I was leaving behind a nightmare that had been lurking in the dark corners of my childhood. To this day, when I think about that night, I feel the same chill run down my spine. I don't know what was behind those eyes or what caused that laugh, but I know it was real. And even after so many years, the memory remains vivid, a reminder that we're not always alone, even when we think we are.